Um, Great, thanks. As you heard, my name is Leif Richardson. I work for the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. And I used to call myself a botanist long ago, and then I got into bees, and so I really like plants in addition to the bees, and so you'll hear frequently from me about plants as I talk about these bees. The main thing that I do at the Xerces Society is lead the California Bumble Bee Atlas, which is a community science project that is driven by volunteer labor. Michelle is one of these people, and Ashley is one of these people also. So we train volunteers, and then they do field science to collect data about where bumblebees occur, and then they submit that to us, and I identify the bees, and I'm going to show you some of that data today. So if you're interested in this project, we just finished our second field season, but we will start our third in March, and so there's lots of opportunity to get involved. As I go through here, I'm going to try to remember to tell you the names of the bumblebees that I have photos of, in the interest of giving you a little bit of sense of the diversity in which species are which. So this one's called Bombus mixtus. Oh, and I will say the Latin names, and I will try to remember to say the common names, but the common names are sort of invented for scientists to talk to the general public, and I forget them all the time because I don't speak those common. They didn't arrive organically the way plant common names did. We just made them up. So Bombus mixtus, it's called fuzzy-horned bumblebee because the males have this really cool patch of hair here and here on the antenna, and it's a common species along the coast and in the mountains in California, but it does not occur south of the transverse ranges. It's not here with us. I first want to tell you just a bit about the Xerces Society. I do this whenever I talk so that people know about this organization more. Our mission is to protect wildlife through the conservation of invertebrates and their habitats, and we do this through 5 programs, one focused on native pollinators, another on endangered species, which is where I work, aquatic invertebrates, butterfly conservation, and pesticide exposure for invertebrates. The bumblebee work and the other bee work is part of this endangered species group. We do, most of our work is based in science, so we're an evidence-based organization. We collect data working in concert with academics, with government scientists, with the general public, with lots of other people who collect scientific information. Importantly, we do a lot of community science. So I've just told you a little bit about the project that I lead, the California Bumble Bee Atlas. We actually have bumblebee atlases in 15 states right now, and we'll have them in 20 states next year. So this is a national program that is quickly expanding. But we have all these other opportunities to get involved in insect invertebrate conservation, including freshwater mussels, numerous monarch butterfly monitoring projects, a brand new Firefly Atlas. So if you're interested, there is the link for community science at Xerces. When our science compels us to do so, we advocate for certain policies on behalf of invertebrates. We do conservation work based on that. This is our director, I think, in Congress. We do a lot of education and training. We've trained thousands of people around the world, especially in the US, in all 50 states, in various conservation practices, restoration practices, invertebrate identification, and more. And we do lots of on-the-ground conservation. So we don't buy land and conserve it, but we help people restore pollinator habitat or restore mussel habitat in streams in the Pacific Northwest. So a lot of this kind of work. And my work is not working with growers to make their farms better places for pollinators, but other people that I work with, that's what they do. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, so I always show this slide and I say, if you're a member, thank you very much. But if you're not, and if you'd like to get involved, there is the link to do that. So I'm going to divide this into 2 pieces. First, I'm going to talk about bumblebees for about 20 minutes, who they are, how they live, what they eat, what's going wrong for some of them. And then I'm going to talk about the California Bumble Bee Atlas, show you how this community science project and its data can address some of the conservation issues that we're having with bumblebees. This is Bombus voznesenskyii, or Voznesensky bumblebee. It's the most common species in California. That's a photo from the Klamath Wilderness, but you could see this bee in this garden. You could see it at the highest elevations in the Sierras. You can see it all over the state. So bumblebees, they are social insects like honeybees. Everybody has a sense of what a honeybee does. It lives in a colony. There's a queen. There are workers, drones. So a division of labor. Different bees are doing different things. Bumblebees do this too. They're a little bit less highly evolved in their sociality than honeybees, but there is a queen and there are workers who are females who don't normally breed. And then there are males and reproductive females. And I want to walk you through this, this cycle. The red star, number 4, is where we are now. It's the end of the growing season. The bumblebees, the reproductive males and females are finding each other and mating. If you go clockwise here in this circle, the next thing that happens is that the newly mated, brand new queens go to hibernation. They eat a lot of food, and then they hibernate. All the other bees in the colony die. And the reason for this is these bumblebees are annual organisms. They have a colony cycle that lasts through the summer, just like lots of plants. The plants sow their seeds and they die, right? And that plant will never live again, but its offspring will come back next year. That's what's going on with bumblebees. And so in springtime, whenever that is, wherever you are, at number 1 there, those same queens come out of the ground having survived anywhere between 2 and 9 months of hibernation and just subsisting on stored floral resources that they've consumed before going into hibernation. That queen will find a place to live. So she needs a pre-existing underground cavity, or sometimes an above-ground cavity like a birdhouse or the wall of your shed or something. She'll then go get pollen nectar, and she'll provision that place with those foods. Then she'll lay eggs there, and she'll sit on top of them and incubate them. And this is real incubation just like birds do. So the bee is raising her body temperature, and she has a bare, hairless area on the underside of her abdomen that she presses into the eggs and the larvae, and it warms them and it speeds up their development. Later, at number 3, the worker caste bees come out. These are the daughters of the mom, and as I said, they normally don't reproduce. They just do the labor of the colony. And it's at this point that the queen stops going outside. She stops foraging for food. She stops building little waxy cups like you see in number 2. She stops doing everything except eating and laying eggs. And I want to just impress upon you that we'll see what happens here, but it's stopped moving. Any ideas?
I'm not sure, but I would love to see.
I've been using the arrows, but they're... Yeah, do that. Okay. While you do that, I'm gonna keep blabbing. The thing that I think is super cool about this is these are social animals, and there's all this communication between individuals of different castes. There's pheromone communication, aggression, and other kinds of physical interaction. And so we think of these as social insects. But in fact, the majority of this annual phase is as a solitary phase. So if you, thank you, Brianna. So if you draw this line here, everything to that side is solitary living. It's one animal. She went to hibernation. She spent 8 or 9 months or something. Then she came out. She fed. She started a colony. It's not a social unit until her about 6 weeks after this phase when the workers come out. And then just for about 2 to 3 months, maybe 4 months, it's a social unit. And then, as I said, all the bees die. And again, it's a solo queen. So this is a really important part of the life cycle that's been ignored to some extent by researchers, and so we're learning more about it. But I always like to just tell people the queen is the most important bee here, and what goes on in winter and spring is critical to everything else that goes on here. So social bees with a pronounced solitary period, that's really important. Okay, before moving on from the colony stuff, I wanted to talk about one enemy that look like. So you can see a bunch of bees there, and the queen is here. This is Voznesensky bumblebee again. And then these are her workers, her daughters. And you can see some stored nectar here. These blobs are the larvae inside of waxy cases. And over on the right side, you see a bee who is not the same species. It's a cuckoo bumblebee. The species is called Bombus insularis. Indiscriminate cuckoo bumblebee is the common name. So there's a whole lineage of bumblebees. They're real bumblebees. They're nested right in the big family tree of bumblebees. They're not the ancestral condition or anything like this, that have lost the sociality. They've lost the ability to gather pollen. They've lost the ability to control their daughters, to get them to go forage and stuff. Instead, what they do is they come out a little later in the season than the host, and they attack the nest of the host. And they use aggression and pheromones to subjugate all of the bees there. They kill all the eggs and all the larvae, and then they start laying their own. And that colony now just produces the offspring of the cuckoo bumblebee. So parasitism, this is social parasitism. Parasitism is really common in the bee world. I haven't talked about other bees yet. We have 20,000 species of bees around the world. In California, we have 1,600 species of native bees. Many of them, about 25%, are parasites of one sort or another. So they attack other bees similar to this. This is social parasitism. There's other types. But I just wanted to show you, they're attacked by all sorts of things. And one of the interesting ones is this other bumblebee that comes into the nest and attacks them. So they live sort of at this axis of sociality and solitary living. That one is like a solitary animal that just goes and attacks a social colony. So really interesting behaviors that go on there. Bumblebees are marked by their mutualisms with plants. So a relationship that both parties benefit from, we call it a mutualism in nature. And bumblebees are pollinators of plants, right? They move the pollen from male parts of flowers to female parts of flowers, affecting sexual reproduction. The bees are not doing this out of the goodness of their little hearts. They're doing it because they are foraging for their food. The only things these bees eat are pollen and nectar. So flowers are essential to bumblebees, and they turn out to be really important pollinators also. So these bees will go to the flower to get their food, then they'll go to the next flower of the same species, and that's how this happens. Something like 85% of flowering land plants, of angiosperms, do better, require an animal to maximize their reproduction. And that's usually bees, but there are many other types of pollinators, most of them insects, but some of them vertebrate animals as well. This part is something we ignored until about 10 years ago. They're incredibly important as crop pollinators. These are wild animals, and they come to the farm to forage for their food again, and when they do so, they're pollinating those crop plants. In fact, about 10% of the total value of agriculture comes from pollination. And of course, honeybees are really important pollinators, and farmers will pay to rent hives. People have businesses where all they do is pollination service for almonds or other things. It turns out, while honeybees are essential for some crops, across the world, it's wild bees that are providing the majority of the pollination service to crops, whether or not you're bringing honeybees to the site. So this is not true for almonds. It's not true for some other crops. But just in general, this is across 80 studies or something, all sorts of different crops. It's wild bees that are doing most of the heavy lifting. And those farmers, probably only 1% of them are aware of this. And so nobody's managing for this essential link to our food security. So it's important to think about what they eat. We can talk much more about host plants a little bit later. But the functional role of them in the environment and also in our cropping systems is one reason that we want to conserve them. Personally, I think there's an intrinsic value to these animals. They're native here. We should conserve them. And I think some of you will agree with me on that, but this is the functional reason, the utilitarian reason that we bring to people's eyes to kind of show them this matters whether you care about bees or not. It's actually part of your food, part of the food going into your mouth. And so, of course, they're really important to maintenance of plant communities. This is a dune system in Arcata, and bumblebees are zipping around from plant to plant pollinating. And so I just want you to think about whether it's in this botanic garden or it's out in the wilds, when you see an assemblage of plants, that's partly mediated by pollination, by reproductive factors for the plants. And so we really need to think about bees as one of the many organisms that structure plant communities. Unfortunately, bumblebees are in trouble. This is a busy figure. I'm going to quickly walk you through some of it. You don't have to read all of it. This is from a recent review of threats to bumblebees. And these pie charts are showing the IUCN Red List ranking for broken out for the various species that live in the geography that's indicated. Red, yellow, and orange colors are bees that are at risk of extinction. I should have said IUCN is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. So red and orange and yellow at risk of extinction at various levels. Green, they're doing fine, they're secure. And gray, which doesn't show up too well here, it's this color, and it's this here. Gray is data deficient. We don't have enough information to actually say, are the bees there secure, or are they on the brink of extinction or something? The numbers in the column show the diversity. So we have about 47 in North America. Look at China. It has 124 species of native bumblebees, and look at the pie chart. We know they occur there, They sit in drawers in museums. We know the various species that occur there, but we cannot tell you whether there's anything wrong with bumblebee populations in China. Well, I can actually tell you there is. But we don't have enough data to do this for some of the more important parts of the world for bumblebees. So a quarter of our species in North America are threatened to and several, about 5 or 6 of them in North America are data deficient. So some of those should be on that list as well. And so it's imperative that we gather more information about bumblebees in order to just do an assessment of how imperiled they are or are not. In California, we have 25 species. That's half of the diversity in the continent. On the continent, 4 of them are provisionally protected by California Endangered Species Act. They're candidates for listing. So clockwise from top left, this is Crotch's bumblebee, or Bombus crotchii, which you have here. That is Franklin's bumblebee, or franklini, from Northern California and Southern Oregon only. And bottom right, we have Suckley's bumblebee, which is one of those cuckoo bees. And here is the host for Suckley's bumblebee. That's Western bumblebee, Bombus occidentalis. The maps are from a recent publication by some colleagues of mine. The light gray dots show the historic distribution of observations, and the dark dots are the recent observations. So for some species, like Western bumblebee, you can see it used to be quite common in the San Francisco Bay Area and along the North Coast and in the Klamath and Siskiyou Mountains. It is utterly gone from those places, and we are really looking hard. We're not finding it. It's still found occasionally in the northern Sierras and elsewhere in the West. But the point here is this is a range shift, right? We can easily see that by comparing old and new observations of bumblebees. So here again, here the specimens or the observations of the bees that people make. That's the data that we use as the basis for conservation decision making. So I'll return to that shortly. But yeah, so these 4 species are rare to uncommon in the state. This one had a great year. You may have seen it if you were paying attention to bees. It's most common from LA to San Diego near the coast, and so we're right in the heart of where we expect it. So what's going wrong for bumblebees? I like to say there are 4 or 5 main drivers of decline that have been identified. The first one, I'll in no particular order, is habitat loss. This one's really important in California. Habitat loss occurs through conversion of wildlands to agriculture, and that's what the top map is meant to show you. It's the increase in cropland over a 4 or 5 year period there. And then it's also conversion to development of various sorts, impervious surfaces and developments in Southern California. You all know about how much development has taken place where we live in the last 50 years, let's say. There used to be bumblebees in lots of places in SoCal that they no longer exist. And in some cases, it's pretty clear the habitat is erased. So they can't live there. It's now a development or a golf course or something. So the bottom map is showing losses in, sorry about the colors, but it's declines in bee abundance, of all bee abundance. And there's kind of a mirroring between the two, because a lot of places where we're increasing cropland, we're losing habitats for bumblebees. Grasslands in particular are really important for them. So one of the ways that we can address this is to do ecological restoration, and also to put in new habitat, put in hedgerows or plantings of various sorts of the flowers that the bees are attracted to and depend on. The next big category is pesticide exposure. So this means insecticides primarily. It means on farms primarily, but it also means backyard use, homeowner use, and pesticides in public spaces and municipal buildings and businesses and all sorts of stuff like this. It's not only insecticides. There are fungicides that are toxic to bees. There are herbicides that are toxic to bees. And there are combinations of insecticides and fungicides, and sometimes insecticides and other things, that are much more toxic than the combination of the two things. So it's a synergistic negative impact. So for example, certain neonicotinoid pesticides, when combined with certain types of fungicides, are something like 100 times more toxic to bees than if you just give them the neonicotinoid. So people tend to think it's just about insecticides, but we really need to think about our amazingly high use of fungicides in agriculture as well. There's a type of pesticides called systemic. They come up through the plant, and as the plant grows, it expresses that pesticide throughout all of its tissues. And so when herbivores feed on the leaves, they die, or they have sublethal impacts of some sort. But these things are also exposed in the flowers, and so of course bees are becoming exposed to that in the flowers. And so systemic pesticides are a particular problem for bees. And this is a question for you to think about. EPA regulation currently uses the honeybee as a surrogate species for testing to determine the danger of certain pesticide products to all bees. So any bee out there, any of those 20,000, in the US we have about 3,500 species. So all of those are covered by the honeybee in the testing world. It's a fake question, really. It is not a good surrogate for the vast difference in life history that we see among different types of bees. Bees are very similar to honeybees in terms of being social insects. They're both the same family of bees. But with all of those other species, most of them are solitary. They live in the ground, solo females provisioning a nest and then leaving and never meeting their offspring. That is nothing like a honeybee hive. So when we're dealing with pesticide exposure, we need to ask, it's good that we have a regulatory system that keeps the worst stuff off the shelf, but I'm just concerned, and I used to work in this industry a little bit, they're not doing the job that they need to do to protect bees. Climate change is a huge issue for bumblebees, as it is for lots of other wild things. Here is a little bit of stuff about that. So the available research shows that bumblebees are disappearing from the hottest parts of their historic ranges. So if you figured out where they occurred in 1950, and then you looked again in the 21st century, the places that tend to have the hottest days, usually the southern margin of the range, they're just disappearing there. So they're moving northward. They're not actually moving, but populations are blinking out. And so the range is shifting northward. But unfortunately, for most of the species, and I was an author in this research, for most of the species we looked at, they didn't move northward on the north end of the range. So it's not like the whole range is shifting, as is the case for some plants and some butterflies and some other organisms. For bumblebees, they're just moving from the south and compressing the size of the range. So they're actually losing range. They're also being forced up in elevation. So we can see this in collections data. If we compare the mid-20th century, the late 20th century, and now, we see that some species are collected higher and higher on the mountains as we go. There are species that are high elevation specialists. They are stuck in the Sierras. They're not gonna go down and find the next mountain in Oregon or Washington. When it gets too hot, they're done. So these are really important relict populations of bees in the Sierras that are at risk of local extinction because of this. There's a lot more to say about other correlates of climate change. We have heat waves, drought, changes in precipitation. These things all impact bumblebees, and usually in negative ways. So we need to deal with climate change if we want to keep all of the bees around. The fourth big category, and final one, well, there's one other, fourth of five, is pathogens. So this is pathogens that are co-evolved with the bumblebees that occur just normally in the environment, as well as pathogens that are bumblebee specialists from Europe that accidentally were introduced here. And it's pathogens from honeybees. Sorry, this happened here. I don't know what happened. It's managed honeybees. It's also managed bumblebees. So we have an industry where you can buy a box of bumblebees that will be shipped through the mail to you, and you just open the door in your greenhouse or your farm, and they go out and they forage and they pollinate. They're the only pollinator for greenhouse grown in Mexico and Ontario and everywhere in between. A certain type of pollination, which includes peppers and tomatoes. Many of the things we eat in the winter that come from Mexico, there's a bumblebee in the greenhouse that's doing the pollination, and it is carrying diseases. Sometimes they escape through the windows, and then they go forage on flowers outside the greenhouse, and that's how they expose other bees to the problem. This graph here is showing that for 3 of 4 species that these people looked at, there was a significant increase in the parasite load of the bees in the 1990s. This is time, and this is the proportion of bees in collections that were infected. And so for this one, and this one, and this is the western bumblebee that we just talked about, there's a significant increase in the prevalence of parasites of a particular type in the 90s, maybe into the early 2000s. And this is right when this bee crashed. It just suddenly disappeared from a lot of places. And so this is pretty good evidence. It's association only, but it's pretty good evidence that these parasites were playing part of a role in this bee's decline. Oh, sorry. Okay, the bee on the top is Bombus terricola. It does not occur here in California. It's a close relative of the western bumblebee, and I kept it in the talk because I wanted to show the two bees on the same flower. Competition from invasive species is a big deal for bumblebees, and it's that one. So honeybees are from Europe, Asia, and Africa. They were brought here in the 18th century, I think, maybe earlier, for pollination and for honey and other hive products. They have naturalized extensively throughout the southern U.S., right here in Southern California. Most of the honeybees that you see are not coming from hives. They're coming from oaks and sycamores where they're living in the wild, right? They're naturalized. This is a problem. This is one of the reasons. Honeybees compete very strongly for nectar and pollen with the native bees. There's an estimate that a single honeybee needs as much pollen over the summer as would be needed to rear 100,000 solitary bee larvae. So it's a lot of bees that we're displacing each year with each hive. Most apiaries are not one hive, they're 200 or something. So think about the effect of that, and honeybees going out up to maybe 10 kilometers from the nest. Mainly they're staying much closer. But this competition has been documented in numerous research. A few weeks ago from some scientists at Davis. The work took place in California. And here we have honeybee abundance, and here we have competition. And I'm not going to describe exactly how they derive those variables. But for all four of these groups, including Bombus, which is the aquamarine line, with more honeybee presence and competition, with more honeybees, there's more apparent competition, which means more competition for limited resources. So this is real. It's taking place all the time. When we talk about invasive plants, we often talk about ripping them out, using herbicides, all sorts of ways we try to get rid of them, right? Have you ever heard about trying to destroy honeybee hives, kill bees? It's off the table, right? We can't even say it, although I just did. I'm not against honeybees. I think they're wonderful animals, but they just do not belong in sycamore trees in San Diego County. They are a problem for natural systems here, just as yellow star thistle is, ice plant is. All of these plants that we see as such pernicious weeds, and we have no problem just yanking them out. Think about it. So it's not very popular. Nobody is going to agree with you right now that honeybees should be eradicated or something. I'm not sure that I agree with that. But if you're a manager of wildlands and you care about biodiversity, that's like the main reason you manage this property, and you have big trees full of honeybees, I think the answer is obvious. And it just isn't something we talk about yet, and I'm trying to get people to do so. Okay, I'm going to switch now to talk about the California Bumble Bee Atlas. First, I'll talk about the methods a bit, and then I'm going to talk about some of the results. So again, we have atlases going on around the nation, and all the colored states are places that we're currently doing atlases. We're going to fill in a bunch of these states next year. And so this is a rapidly expanding project. People can participate all over the country, and it is really fun. So on this slide, I'll tell you about the methods briefly. So this is community science, sometimes called citizen science, although you don't need to be a citizen to participate. So I call it community science. We train volunteers through live remote webinars. We train volunteers in person, as is going on here and there. And so basically what we're teaching volunteers to do is how to do a 45-minute timed survey in a delimited area of their choosing. And they catch all the bees they can find. They put them in a cooler with ice, and so they're anesthetized by the cold. And after 45 minutes of work, you go to your cooler, you pull the bees out one at a time, and you photograph them extensively. You take some notes about the habitat, and then you send all that to our data management platform, which is called Bumblebee Watch. And then later, I go and I do all the identification, and we crunch the numbers and such. It's really fun. People learn about lots of things about nature, I guess. And for most people, bees are new, so it's a sort of discovery about things. I should have said, the map over there, we gridded out the whole state with 50 kilometer by 50 kilometer squares, and we asked the volunteers to adopt a grid cell and then to do 2 surveys there. And so 50 kilometers by 50 kilometers, it's a huge area. They just have to go to 2 different places and do surveys, or the same place twice, separated by 3 weeks or more. So that's sort of the paradigm for collecting bees in a grid cell, and they're colored according to start dates for the project. We have 3 different start dates depending on the season, the phenology. So you don't have to read all of this. This is an example slide from the trainings that we do. So I just go to the very basic thing and talk about catching bumblebees. How do you handle a net? What do you do once you have a bee in the net? How do you get it from the net into this vial? Are they safe in coolers? For how long? All this kind of stuff. We always talk about stings, even though most people won't get stung doing this work. It's very safe if you follow the methods that we teach and you pay attention as you're doing the work. It's very rare to get stung, but it can happen. And of course, stings by insects like this can lead to bad outcomes for some people. But so we talk a bunch about that sort of stuff because it's a latent concern for people, even if they don't express it. Once I start talking about stings, they start nodding. And we teach photography. We teach a lot of photography. We do not expect people to buy a fancy camera. You can use your cell phone, but if you have a better camera, you can do that. So we teach what parts of the body you need to photograph, various parts of the head, the thorax, the abdomen, and its 6 segments or 7 segments. This is a male bumblebee that has 7. You can see the dividing lines. You can see individual hairs and what their color is. So this is a very nice photo. They're not all this good, but we ask people to try to get photos where you can actually see hairs. If you can see some hairs in focus, then probably we can start to think about identifying that bumblebee. And then we produce identification resources for volunteers to learn to identify the bees. We stress that you do not have to learn to identify bumblebees to participate. It's only if you want to. The most important thing that volunteers do is take good photos after having done the field survey. And ID is what I have to do, but we support people to learn as much about ID as they want to. So this little 2-pager thing shows, it divides all the species into different sort of gross color categories. So if you have a bee with red on it, it's got to be in this category, and you can start looking around for the pattern. And there's the little cartoon of the same species called Hunt Bumblebee. We also do a sort of digital field guide when we do the training that looks like this, with a map of historic and recent observations, both of California and the nation. These little cartoons that are from a field guide to bumblebees, and field marks, sort of like a field guide. So we teach all of the bees like that. I'll now talk about the results from 2022. So 2022 was our first year, and we, of course, worked this year. I'm sitting on tons of data that I haven't analyzed yet. So in a couple of months, this slide will say 2 years of results, and I'll have a combination. But for now, this is last year's data. So we had 459 surveys done by about 240 people. They collected about 4,000 bee records. So they photographed and sent in photos of about 4,000 bees in those surveys. And we found 22 of the historically present 25 species. We've now found 23. So you found one of the others. The other 2 are missing and not likely to turn up, but it's possible. And there's a map of where the surveys took place. And I've colored it just according to whether the person saw 1 or more bees in the survey, or they got skunked and they had no bees. And I do that just to make the point that California is a marginal place to be a bumblebee. It's the highest quality habitat in some places, and it is 0 habitat in other places. And so we often find, we do the hard work, we collect all this, we go there for 45 minutes and we see no bees. That's really important information for interpreting where bees like to live, right? So we always ask people to send that data in. So one way of looking at what we found and how the bees we found in 2022 compare to the historic baselines is to take the data set from last year and compare it to a larger database of 20th century collections of bumblebees in the early part of the 21st century. And I'm using relative abundance here, or frequency, across the x-axis. And then these are all the species names in Latin. And the blue dot is the historic data. Basically, this is the 20th century. And the gray square is our data, grayish-green. And so anywhere where the gray-green square is to the left of the dot, that indicates a decline as measured by this metric. So for the top species, Vosnesenskii, it looks like it declined a little bit. Here's one that declined almost all the way. That's the western bumblebee. You can see Vaz cal at the top here. That's a lumping category of males that we can't distinguish between two different species, Vaz nasenskyii and calligenosis. In fact, 25% of all of the records, we can't identify because you need a specimen and you need to take apart the genitalia and measure things. So removing that from the data, it looks pretty similar. This is not the best type of metric for understanding changes in populations over time, but for bees, it's one of the only metrics we have. Historic data for bees lives in museum drawers. It's dead bees on pins. And so we've digitized hundreds of thousands of those records. And that gives us a sense of where they occurred and when they occurred and what they ate in some cases. But it's not survey limited data. We don't know how much effort went into the work. So there's no way to know what the abundance of bees in the site was like. We can't compare that from 1975 to 2022. So relative abundance or frequency is about as good as we can do in some contexts. Let's break the data out into individual species. 22 species worth of data that we can play with. And so here are maps for a common species and an uncommon species. This is Bombus bifarius, or two-form bumblebee, and that is Crotch's bumblebee, Bombus crotchii. And the gray dots are historic, and the blue dots are 2022. And so for this one, I just want you to see that the blue dots largely accord with the gray, they're sort of overlapping. That one, not so much, especially in Southern California. There's a lot of historic data from Riverside County, from San Diego, from Orange, and we did not find a lot of that bee last year in those places, despite doing a lot of survey work there. Not so this year. We have found it a lot in Southern California this year. So just to give you the sense that we can, looking at individual species, we can start to understand the biogeography a little and how time has changed where they occur. This is Crotch's bumblebee. That's a male. The males have humongous eyes, and if you're interested, I can talk about why. The same two species. Let's look at their host plant use. So for every single record in that database of 4,000 bees, the person sent us a photo of the flower and told us what the flower's name was if they knew it. And then I figured out all the unknowns. And I just have it by genus here along the y-axis. This is, again, frequency along the x-axis. So this is the percentage of records of each of these two species of bees that were found on that plant. So for example, bifarius at the, let's say crotchii at the top. Its main plant is Asclepias, milkweed, the most important plant, and it was about 17% of all collections of that bee were from milkweed, and that's a lot. So this bee really specializes to some extent on numerous species of native milkweeds. Look at this bee. It was not found even once on milkweed. So just to make the case, these are generalist bees. They can eat hundreds of different types of pollen, but these two species have preferences. The geography is partially overlapping. There's a little bit of slop in this figure, but by contrast, bifarius goldenrods, or solidago, which is blooming in the garden right now, was the most important plant for them, and it was not used at all by Crotch's bumblebee. So when we think about restoration for bees, when bumblebee habitat, which bumblebees and where and exactly what do we mean? This is the bifarius, the two-form bumblebee, a queen and a worker. It gets even more complicated and interesting. The different sexes have different food preferences. So this is Bombus bifarius. It's the same data that I showed there, but now broken out by males and females. The gray bars are the males and the blue bars are the females. And so you see some things over here that the males heavily favor. That's solidago. The Xerces thistles, Stachys, I forget the common name. But look at the females. They're eating Phacelia, Delphinium, vetches. So there are obvious reasons for this. Females are collecting pollen and males are only collecting nectar. But my point in showing this is if you want to conserve a species, you need both parts. And we typically do not think very much about males at all. And we don't think about diversity below the level of species. So I think it's important to look at a granular scale at this stuff. We collected data about fire. I have about 5 more slides. We found, so every record, every survey, the person indicated whether there was evidence of fire at the site. And we found that when they said yes to that question as opposed to no, there was a statistically significant higher abundance of bees in the survey than if they didn't. It's only one bee, but it's a really strong difference in terms of the statistics. So fire benefits bumblebees. It does so in a couple of ways. It creates, lots of plants germinate. Some of the existing shrubs and other plants will revegetate. New stuff will germinate that only germinates with fire. There's more nutrition in the soil. And so there's other research that corroborates this, that bumblebees have higher abundance, sometimes higher diversity, in the several years after fire. We looked at this data in another way. This is a statewide, and I just, for every pixel on the map, I attributed it as to the date of the last fire. And then for the points, those are the records that the volunteers brought in, we figured out what was the last fire for every point. And then I made this graph where this is years since fire. Fire happened here. There's 1 year since fire, 2 years since fire. And this is the number of bees in the survey, or the abundance. And so you can see the abundance is statistically significantly higher for the first 2 or 3 years after fire. And at the 4th year, it's about average, which is that dashed line, and then it declines a bit. So fire is good for bumblebees. Not the day of the fire, but next year, especially 2 years down the road. I've seen this sort of anecdotally myself. You go to fire scars and you tend to do really well finding bumblebees. So fire is a huge issue in California. It's problematic, but here's a reason that at least some fire may be beneficial to them. This is really preliminary, and I probably shouldn't even show it, but we have some data on drought. I looked at where bumblebees occur in various, going back about a century, looking at their prevalence in the set according to whether the years were wetter than usual or drier than usual. And so along the x-axis here, this is the proportion of average summer precipitation. So this is average right here. So everything to the left is below average, dry. Everything to the right is wetter than usual. And these are just 3 species that are strongly affected by drought. So these two, the western bumblebee and this one called calagenosis, or fogbelt bumblebee, in wet years in the summer, they do better. And this one, by contrast, seems to do less well. There are some issues with this figure that I'm not going to talk about right now, but just to make the point, drought is a factor for these bees, and this data set can help us resolve some of that. We found really interesting patterns across the day. So this is time of day, and so just look at the shape of these things. Here's one that's most common in the morning, and it just gets less common. Here's one that gets more common across the day. Here's one with a bell curve where it's most common around noon. This one's also common in the morning and then drops off. So if you were going to design a survey for bumblebees, it matters what time of day you go outside, right? In fact, we found for that rare species, crotchii, that surveys that turned up that had crotchii in them, as opposed to surveys that failed to find it, took place about an hour earlier than those other surveys. So, so if you were looking for this rare bee, detection probabilities vary over the course of the day. And if you survey in the morning, you're more likely to find it than in the afternoon if it's truly there, right? So this is probably useful to land managers, to CDFW. I need to go faster here. We looked at habitat preferences. We asked the volunteers to tell us what habitat they were working in for their surveys, and so we found bumblebees preferred grasslands and forests. They did not like developed areas very well. And this is showing you abundance and diversity there. It's a little bit different between the two. The two are not exactly concordant. We also looked at diversity and abundance across ecoregions. So that's the ecoregion map. The colors aren't great on this machine. The colors of the box plots are the same as the ecoregions. So you can see we had the highest abundance of bees in a number of mountainous places. The Cascades, Northern Basin Range, Sierra Nevada, and Coast Ranges. It was not the same it was somewhat similar for diversity, but some of the mountain ranges were not great places to find high diversity of bumblebees. For example, the Cascades is just a middling place to find bumblebees in terms of diversity. It's a great place to find a lot of bumblebees, just 3 species, or maybe 4. And that's that. So again, the California Bumble Bee Atlas, it's super rewarding and fun. I try to make it that way. And you are welcome to join us next year. We'll be doing trainings in February. If you go to the website and register, you'll get an occasional email from me with project updates. And yeah, you're welcome to contact me with questions about that. And with that, I'll stop talking, and we have some time for questions. Yeah. Thank you.